The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.
Hey folks, greetings and welcome along to the New Zealand Tech Podcast. We're back for 2023, and although this isn't our first episode, it's our first real live in-person recorded in 2023 episode. So great to be back. I hope everyone had a great break. And we're joined today by Phil Howie, who's the CEO and founder at Onwardly. Welcome along, Phil.
Welcome. Thanks for having me on board. It's great to be back from holiday, back into the full swing of things, shaking off the holiday haze and booting up the brain again to get back into it.
Yeah.
So thanks for having me on the show.
Oh, it's great. Well, first time, so you better give listeners a bit of an intro of, where you fit into this big, bad world of technology in New Zealand.
Indeed. Well, thanks again for having me. It's nice to be on the show for the first time, and no doubt I'd love to have you on our show as well. But my name's Phil. I have been in the tech industry here in New Zealand for probably about 20 years. I'm currently founder and CEO of Onwardly, and we're a cybersecurity SaaS platform, which is helping other organizations and startups really build, manage, and scale their whole security program out. So making it way more accessible and easy for them to achieve that through a software platform. So that's keeping me pretty busy at the moment. We're a small team based here in Auckland with global plans to take over the world one day. Another Kiwi success story. Working hard on that. But I've been in the sort of tech space for around about 2 decades here. Started as a web designer really in the noughties, and headed up and more recently spent about 6 or 7 years at Pushpay. I was employee number 1 there, and sort of had a baptism of fire through the startup world, and more recently have gone on to found Onwardly at the beginning of the pandemic.
Great. Oh, it's really, really exciting to have you on the show. Been looking forward to having this happen. And look, it's a good time as well because we've kicked into the new year. There's some pretty interesting news today. We'll talk a little bit about a few things from over the holiday break. I've had a bit of a chance to compare our mobile networks around the country. So that's interesting. We've got some questions around whether New Zealand should be banning TikTok, which was a question posed yesterday on TV3. But of course, in that context, you get a very short space to sort of delve into the topic. So I thought it's a good one to delve into a little bit more. Also, Tesla making Kiwi Chinese member of their team what appears to be the number 2 in Tesla. Pretty much, I think, in fact, it was even rumored late last year that he was going to be the new CEO, take over entirely, but seems to have taken the 2IC position to Musk. So we'll delve into that one bit there on CES and some of the cool things coming out of CES, and then into cybersecurity things, a couple of quite current topics on cybersecurity, and of course a chance to delve in and hear about Onwardly and some of the Onwardly story. Let's jump in. First up, I guess this time I've spent outside of home, outside of Auckland, sort of tripping around the country. In my case, doing that in the Tesla. So getting a chance to get a feel for how our charging networks have been around the country has this has been been quite interesting to look at. I think actually we're doing pretty well from that perspective. I think we've seen a huge uptick in the number of electric vehicles on the road.
Yeah, they're everywhere.
In New Zealand, and it's probably felt for Tesla owners that there should be more Tesla charging around the place. But I also see the sort of the challenge. I mean, they're unique in that they're the one automaker that has their own EV charging locations, and those grow. It feels sort of fairly slowly, but actually most of the time you turn up and they're not very busy unless it's kind of a holiday weekend or a very, very busy time. I think the one place I turned up at and almost had to wait was Hamilton.
That's a very New Zealand thing, isn't it? I almost had to wait for this.
Yeah.
In other countries, queuing is just kind of a way of life, but I think we're sort of allergic to it here.
So yeah, very, very good. And yeah, I think, pretty much trying to think if there were any other points that we had to generally, queue for EV charging. There are a few interesting spots where you've got things like the warehouse, and some of their locations they have sort of reasonably fast charging, about half the speed of the typical sort of ChargeNet EV charger, but linked to the ChargeNet network, so you can see whether they're available and so on, that are completely free, which is
That's
kind of
nice.
odd.
How many malls did you end up having to go to as part of your road trip?
We mostly we stopped where it was sort of convenient, where you could stop for a meal, or you wanted to grab some, a drink or coffee or what have you, and maybe I was a little bit, what's the word, when you're staying with friends and family, sometimes in fact I turned up at brother's place in Wellington, and it was very early in the morning, having got an offer, overnight type ferry sailing. I think it sailed at 2:30 a.m. and came in at 6. And so there was a cable dangling out the window if we wanted to plug in and charge, and a note on the door where to sleep and so on. So
that's a nice touch, isn't it? They left that extension cord out for you.
That was pretty cool. And then I didn't use it. I was like, no, we'll be fine. There's a Tesla charger in Wellington now, but it was actually far enough away that I didn't use it until we were heading north again. But there's generally it's good options. I think we had one scenario with one place we stopped, and I guess there are some safety aspects probably to running a cable out the window sort of thing. But we hit one particular location where they're like, oh, all our power went offline when somebody plugged in an EV, and even though they had official EV chargers there, they didn't want anyone to plug in an EV. So that was probably a little bit more of a preference of the owner that was not in the direction of EVs.
Right. Fair enough.
But generally pretty good infrastructure. Went to Tiano and then took the road to Milford Sound. Milford Sound didn't have any EV charging because they're not on the national grid. So you got some scenarios like that, and you just had to think about it. It wasn't any sort of issue in terms of the actual range. We had enough to get back and stop lots of times along the way for photos and wandering around and so on, see the sights. So so I think we're in a good position as far as that's concerned. Got to look at sort of comparison with our mobile networks between Vodafone, Spark, and 2 Degrees, and we had Mark Callender on a few months ago from 2 Degrees. He was touting how good their network is, and hey, we're as good as the other guys, sort of thing. And I guess it had probably been a while since I had tried their network, but I wasn't quite sure whether there was any sort of validity to that. But what I found now is actually the three networks are reasonably similar in terms of coverage. Where the difference seems to be is whether you're getting, basically what speed you're getting out of the network. And but most often the areas where I found that there say wasn't coverage, and the Milford Sound trip was one of those examples, and there are a few spots around the country where there are sort of black spots, which I know the government's been investing into to improve, which is awesome. But yeah, generally it just comes down to who's got the better speed in a given situation
How did you?
more often than one
Mm,
network's got coverage and the others don't. I mean, there was a little bit of that,
yeah.
but it's much more even than I would have guessed, or certainly
Right.
from where we were a few years ago.
'Cause most of the time you just live
Yeah.
on one network, don't you? So it's hard to. So
Yeah,
you're often not really doing the comparison.
yeah.
So how did you do all three? Did you sort of have different SIM cards, or were you just roaming on different
So
ones? Or
two phones, iPhone, Android. iPhone had an eSIM,
oh yeah.
and yes, had a SIM, and then Android had a SIM in it. And so
Mm.
yeah, you got that good comparison. But the speed, for 2 degrees, that was what I probably primarily used for data. And if we were tethering, I used 2 degrees for that. And I can't think that there were too many times where I found the experience frustrating that I had to,
Yeah.
flip across to one of the other connections. There were probably one or two scenarios where I did, but it was pretty good.
Pretty fast. I mean, I was a few years back now, put we looked at putting broadband into a batch in I think it was Tyra and Coromandel,
Mm.
and trying to get a copper line in, a setup on a copper line was going to be weeks, and it was going to be a nightmare. It was going to be expensive and probably quite slow. And so, Spark had come out with the little 4G modems, and it was just basically perfect. It was awesome speed. Setup was about 15 minutes. Put it anywhere, and it's just using cellular data,
Yeah.
and it serves the whole house. People watch Netflix and all sorts of stuff on it, and it's really, really good,
Yeah.
And so we're pretty lucky, I think.
Yeah, we are. So, and it's good to have that competition. Of course, mileage is going to vary depending on where you are. I think there's a role for Starlink, and in fact, in the recent chat that I had with Tony Baird, the CTO at Vodafone, he was talking about Starlink being an option now for them to drop a cell site in a location. It needs to get backhaul and communicate with the rest of the network. And so I
Yeah.
was thinking, actually, it was on the way to Milford Sound when I was in a spot with no coverage. I was thinking, wow, yeah, that would actually be quite transformational. You could drop a cell site absolutely anywhere, and as long as you can get some sort of power generation, that's not too expensive. And who knows whether they maybe need a commercial variant, and exactly what they'd be paying. But the fact that they could get that satellite backhaul to put a cell site in a location that otherwise would cost many millions of dollars to connect up potentially, that's brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, surely camper vans and yachts and things are pretty obvious examples for that as well. Where you're probably likely out of significant coverage for long periods of time, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I did see there was a photo went round when Starlink started coming out of somebody that had a Starlink dish attached to the front of their Tesla or something for probably just mucking around, but yeah, there's a lot more options now, right?
I was listening to I was reading some other news recently about some of the predictions that Starlink will actually go public this year, and probably be worth somewhere north of $75 billion. So, significant, and pretty impressive technology for sure.
Yeah. Other thing on the trip that I used, I visited the folks at Ferntech shortly before I headed away, and picked up the DJI Mini 3 Pro, and they've also, around the same time, they launched the DJI Mini 3, which is a slightly lower cost, but has a lot of similar technology in it, but it's a lower price point. And picked one of those up, and there were a few locations where I was able to fly that, and really a big step up from I'd had the tiny little, or the original DJI Mini, which I think is probably sold under the name DJI Mini SE these days, and that was maybe $600, $700, $800 depending on how you buy it, with a Fly More kit or just the basic one before, and that really impressed me. did end up smashing it up though. In fact, 2 of them. So what I liked about the Mini 3 Pro, better video, better I guess sort of range because it's using DJI's own RF tech rather than just Wi-Fi for the communication. And the fact that it's actually got some collision avoidance sensors, as long as you're not flying it sideways. So you have to be a little bit careful on that front. But I didn't smash it up. And yeah, but definitely pretty impressed with it. And the other thing with the just the plain Mini was you had to use your cell phone to be sort of the screen for the controller. And one of the options with the Mini 3 and the Mini 3 Pro is you can get the remote control with a full screen in it. I think it's effectively got sort of modded Android phone, built into it without the sub module. So that was just a slicker experience because you could just get up and running very, very quickly and throw your drone up. On the flip side, there's a lot of places you can't fly. So we went to, for instance, the Meraki boulders and in Otago, and I was thinking, I wonder what this would be like, on video. And I had a look, and there was a YouTube of someone sort of flying through there, maybe a week or 2 before we were there. And I was like, that's pretty cool. And then I Googled what are the council regulations in the area, and no, you have to have gone through and and got approval before you can fly. So I'm not sure whether whoever took that video did
maybe
that,
they want to quietly take that down
or not.
They get a call from the council.
And whether the councils really do anything about it, because I think probably all of us have been somewhere where you wouldn't probably really like drones sort of flying over, and maybe there's even signs up saying no drones, and you're in an incredible part of New Zealand and there's drones flying around. And Milford Sound was one of those spots where it was no drones. And actually, I can't remember whether we saw any drones there, but you've got an airport there that's right there, so you need to be very careful about that sort of thing. There's a lot of wisdom for not flying drones in some of these places, but
hopefully people are getting the message. There was some increasingly urgent messaging coming from sort of Auckland Airport about drones being spotted a while back, sort of seemingly every other day or every other week. It was quite terrifying. It sounded like it was only a matter of time before a plane flew into one. But haven't heard as much about that. I'm not sure if imagine it's still a risk for sure, but hopefully some of the public messaging has got out there and is working.
Look, I think you've got the AirShare app, which gives you advice on where you should and shouldn't be flying, which is helpful. But you do have to look up the local council regulations and so on as well. Worth doing that stuff if you're going to fly a drone. But it's amazing how far drones have come over the sort of last, trying to work how many years, 12 years that we've been doing this show. The very early ones that we'd be getting sent, in the early days of NZ Tech Podcast, to just the quality of the drones now, how they just can sit in the air so still, and the video footage just absolutely stunning, broadcast quality from a sub $1,000 drone in some cases. So really cool. Now couple of topics that I guess are really definitely for us in New Zealand. One was this question around whether New Zealand should be banning TikTok. What are your thoughts about TikTok as a platform, and in terms of, I guess, some of the data that they collect, and then is TikTok as a company trustworthy, and then is the environment that they operate in sort of politically something that we can feel as though okay or not? I mean, what are your thoughts on maybe how we should analyze this? Those might be the wrong questions.
Yeah, I think there's a long history of social media companies, abusing our privacy. So there's nothing new there. I think they've kind of taken it to perhaps to the next level, and there's certainly some geopolitical risks there that perhaps we haven't quite encountered in the same way before. So there are certainly increasing calls, around the world to ban it. Some countries have already banned it completely outright. I think locally here in NZ, members of parliament are not allowed to install it on their phones, so it's already sort of
Well, they're advised not to. Advised
not,
speaker,
strongly advised not to.
Yeah.
You'd be high risk to do that. So I think it's cause for concern. There's some really smart people. Adam Barlow, I think, was quite vocal about this recently. I think it should be approached with a lot of caution. I mean, I use it a little bit personally, but it's very, very addictive as well. I think regardless of the data they have on you, just the algorithm and everything that's put in front of you is kind of like they've hacked your brain. It's amazing, and quite full on. So I think there's definitely some concerns there, not for adults, but for kids as well. So I think approached with a lot of caution and you're really keeping an eye on what permissions you're giving it, particularly at a technical level. Turn everything off, dial it all down would be the absolute minimum, bare minimum, and if you're worried, don't install it at all, probably. It is concerning for sure.
Yeah, and look, there've been issues in the past, haven't there? With them, with the varying aspects of the app and data that's ended up in the wrong places, and then there's the sort of as you say, the geopolitical sort of aspects of it. I mean, you look to the US, and I don't think there's too many people that would put all their faith and trust in the varying sort of governmental organizations in the US, but most of us would probably feel a little bit more sort of relaxed that if something untoward is sort of happening, that's being driven by those sort of government entities or even by a social network, that people are more likely to speak up about it. They're whistleblowers, and these things sort of tend to come out if there's something pretty bad happening. And I guess we've seen a lot of that with Meta and so on. Things have been laid pretty bare, and so that's I guess the alternative in a way to TikTok, because if TikTok were to shut down, who's the biggest benefactor? It's gonna be Meta, because they'll be picking things up, right? So it's not just it'll shut down and people won't spend any more time, watching content anymore. It'll be, I guess, YouTube or Meta that are gonna
they're bigger. I mean, TikTok's bigger than every other social network combined now.
It's
insane,
isn't it?
Massive. They've completely destroyed these other social networks from a daily usage point of view and a increasingly revenue and valuation. So they're huge. They're massive and very, very effective at what they do.
Yeah, I spoke to two chaps yesterday. I went down the road to get my beard trim, because I've been growing it over the holiday, and with TV3 wanted to talk about this topic. I was like, oh no, don't come now. Give me a few minutes, and I'll go get my beard trim. And anyway, I turned up after an online booking at this barber down the road, and he said, oh, you'll just have to wait. There's a few people ahead of you. And I'm like, I just booked via your app, and it's 12:44. I've got a 12:45 booking, and I mentioned that I had to do this interview, and they were like, oh no, go ahead. And then we had this huge chat around TikTok, and it was actually quite fascinating. One of them was we looked through his, how much time he had spent on it over the last few days, and it was typically around an hour 20 every single day. The other chap said he had actually written, he'd done a project on TikTok while he was I think at high school, which is finished up in university now. But he had written this paper on what he felt were the inherent risks of the platform. But even he said, oh yeah, I'm on there, and he had a look, and he's spending 50 minutes a day on it, even though he's actually convinced he's aware of it. that it's probably not a good platform. And so you've got this sort of challenge of just how addictive it is. I guess it's it's like any addiction, right? You kind of might know that thing's bad, but it's not necessarily once you're into it, it's not necessarily an easy thing to go. Oh yeah, we'll flag that. I'll stop
Doesn't mean
smoking.
you
I'll
don't.
stop smoking
right.
today because I know that's bad. It's like there's a little bit more challenge to it. And then if we step back to that bigger picture from a national perspective, if the government actually says, okay, we're cancelling TikTok in New Zealand, then how does that play out? It's going to impact some people's businesses because there are some businesses that have invested a lot. I spoke to the founder and owner of the Kiwi water park in Cromwell on the New Zealand Business Podcast, or the New Zealand Sales and Marketing Insider recently. And they're getting millions and millions of views on TikTok. That's kind of how they've built the business, right?
Yeah.
So if that disappeared overnight, I mean, it might cost them maybe $500,000 in terms of lost business, right? So it's not. There's some complexities to making these changes, aren't there?
I mean, people are probably making their living off it as well. Influencers and people like that are really, really big. Not just traditional businesses, but like influencers who will be earning quite considerable money and all that sort of stuff as part of their world as well. So yeah, I think there'd be a lot of angry 12-year-olds as well, no doubt, throughout the country. But look, I think it has to be considered, and especially in light of being an election year. I'm not too alarmist about this, but I think there are some genuine concerns for sure.
Is it? I mean, I guess the small chunk that they took on the TV3 story yesterday from me, or one of the two, was that I'd be more comfortable if it wasn't operating in New Zealand. How do you feel?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to ban completely because it's. How do you block it at an IP address level? Like, how does that even work? Right?
Yeah.
Sure, you could
probably always get around.
You could remove from the App Store maybe, but it's a website. It's kind of everywhere. I think that's hard to do in some ways technically. I don't know. I kind of had a really strong opinion on this. I think I should be approached with caution and watched pretty carefully. But banning is probably a fairly drastic move that not that many countries are prepared to fully do. That are Western countries, I guess.
It's pretty unusual.
So
isn't
it's
it?
pretty unusual.
Pretty
to
unusual
ban
move.
an app.
Yeah.
I can't think of too many apps which are just outright banned in New Zealand right now. That are approved on the store but actually banned for what other reasons.
I guess the topic came up because this is really being pushed US wise. Where it's been blocked at a government level to a large degree, and the debate is ongoing around basically blocking it completely in the US. So it's going to be an interesting one to follow. I think if there is a ban in the US, we might see more than the current state where I think India is the high profile location where it's been banned to date. So
I think as more data, more evidence is gathered on how it's being abused, that will fuel the case for more and more. Like I was reading something the other day about journalist IP address. Location data was being gathered out of to check basically to be used against them. And so as you start to see more abuses of people's privacy and human rights, I think you're gonna make a pretty strong case.
Now, quite a big one. I noticed nobody seems to really have been sort of talking about in the media. I was sort of maybe expecting a headline around it or something. Was we heard about Tom Zhu, who was the head of Tesla in China for some time, and he'd been across in the US overseeing some operations there. Seems to have been, formally positioned to a very senior role now within Tesla. That looks like it is very much the second in command of Tesla, and I guess it could be argued that that the things that we heard late last year, that he was going to be the CEO of Tesla, that he is in or almost is in everything but name, with the focus that Musk is putting on Twitter. But he's a Kiwi. He's got a New Zealand passport. He's studied a few blocks away from our studio down at AUT, Auckland University of Technology. And I think it's really, really cool to see
See that link to New Zealand,
to see that. And wow, he has he's done incredibly well. What Tesla have achieved under his leadership in China from a production standpoint is just mind blowing. I mean, that factory that they have there, is outputting. I think probably the majority of vehicles that they produce globally across 4 factories,
hundreds of thousands of vehicles.
Most of it's coming, and their current sort of run rate, I think they're able to produce, if everything's operating well and staff aren't taken out by COVID. That one factory can probably produce equivalent or close to, or maybe more than what they produced in 2022 in terms of vehicles. And so understandable they would be looking at drawing on him a bit further afield, but interesting that he's doing more than just the production side. So obviously a really switched on chap.
I think that is like what people often don't think about with famous entrepreneurs such as Elon Musk, who are in the spotlight a lot, is there's often a very capable, there has to be a capable executive team behind them, underneath them, that are out of the spotlight, getting on with making it all happen. And clearly those people exist in Tesla and SpaceX and all these sorts of things. So they probably don't want to be in the spotlight naturally, but they're obviously doing really, really good work to make it all happen. Reading that they had slept at the factory, during some of the COVID outbreaks over there, which is a very Elon Musk thing to do. So he's clearly, he's clearly spent some time in the sleeping bag. Which is probably won a bit of Musk's approval as well. So good on him. He's obviously doing very well. He's a very, very smart, capable guy for sure.
I'd be fascinated to follow it and see, is there, he's got his Kiwi passport. We don't know too much about him. There's been bits and pieces online around what he's done before and so on. He's a very talented leader by by all reports, and would love to see him back in New Zealand.
We'll take the credit for it as a country for its success. Yeah, that's right.
Absolutely. That's probably all the discussion we need to have about Musk this episode. So onto other things.
Hard to avoid sometimes, isn't it?
CES, what used to be the Consumer Electronics Show, always the big thing at this time of year, and some years prior to COVID, I would go there. It is such a full-on event, and it was really nice to be doing family things, catching up with family and friends, and doing other things, and enjoying New Zealand summer. For those that did go, some pretty interesting products that were shown off. Often it tends to be things that are maybe a little bit of a way out, so they're not necessarily available now.
Again, by definition, pretty much, isn't it, with CES?
But sometimes it's immediate product launches, so you've sort of got a mix. But there were a couple of things that that were interesting. We'd heard about Sony moving into electric vehicles and a collaboration with Honda, and so they showed that off. Their new brand is called Afeela, which is the word feel with an A on the beginning and on the end. Not sure it sort of, I don't know, rings out that well for me, but it's fine. It's the car looks pretty cool. The tech in it looks good. Yeah. And you can sort of join up the dots, and possibly they're embedding a PlayStation 5 kind of in there from an entertainment perspective, which really, only Tesla's kind of gone nuts with the in-car entertainment. But
it is
of
an
course,
interesting avenue to differentiate, isn't it?
Yeah.
They seem to be going all in on that, and maybe that'll pay off, maybe it won't, but it's certainly feels like an area that could be differentiated on pretty well. With Sony are some of the best in the world at this.
Oh yeah.
So maybe it's one of those cars where the kids fall in love with it and they convince their parents it's got to be the one, because it's incredible and they can play PlayStations or whatever, or lights and entertainment and all sorts of stuff. It could be pretty amazing. Sony, not generally a car company, so it'll be interesting. They're talking about using graphics for things like the heads-up display and using Unreal Engine, which is interesting to see how that goes. I think there are some quite well-established conventions around driving a vehicle that probably shouldn't be messed with too much. And it's interesting coming from kind of my backgrounds, and part of my background is user experience design, and so I think about these things quite a lot. And there's something, I was reading something recently about that tactile hardware controls still actually win out at the end of the day when it comes to things like driving a car. Even instead of a lot of the touchscreen controls you have now to do things, they actually just work better because they're easier to find and more tactile and all that sort of stuff. And so I think we're seeing kind of this move towards driving with basically driving with an iPad, and I think that's going to come back a little bit. I don't think that's actually necessarily the future.
There's a bit of a balance, isn't it, to get a good result?
Yeah, it's a bit fiddly, and I think it's kind of dangerous in some ways when you're trying to go 3 screens deep and toggle a slide controller just to control something. I think that's kind of dangerous, and maybe you need technology to stop you crashing as part of the package. But there's something to be said for actually some well placed tactile hardware controls. So interesting to see how that all shapes up.
Yeah, look, I think it's quite fascinating. Now, one of the other things that caught my attention was on the smartphone camera front and technology from LG Innotek, who was showing off a optical telephoto zoom lens. And so what they talked about is this would give a smartphone the capability to do a 4 times up to 9 times type of zoom. So like a variable zoom without it being, we're used to that on our phones that we can, pinch and zoom and so on, but it's largely done on a digital basis, and maybe there's a fixed zoom at a particular level that, when you go past 2 times, you've got a 2 times zoom and it uses that and so on. But this concept of actually having having an optical zoom, in theory, should give you a lot better result.
Better image,
and we have played over the years. In fact, I found we were doing a bit of a tidy up of some space that we no longer need. And so what have we got sitting in there? And there was this Motorola phone that we had that you could get these add-on modules for. And one of the modules was a full zoom camera with a full optical zoom that would, come out, I don't know, 6-7 centimeters or so. And I remember, trying it at the time, and it was like, yes, it was optical, but the result wasn't actually a million times,
Right.
Or didn't look a million times better than what we're used to. Then you've got to carry this kind of big,
you got extra hardware to carry,
big thing, with you. But it was an interesting concept. So if they can take that and put that into a high end smartphone, I think that would be pretty good. And I found myself sort of using a mix of different mobile devices depending on where we were. So there was the Samsung's good for that bigger zoom because of the lens it has, and then I'd use the iPhone for something else, and Oppo for something else, and between 3 phones you get some reasonable results. But
that's a lot of phones for taking one photo.
That's probably not the typical sort of thing, but it's it was a way, I guess, of testing and experimenting with the different devices. And we went to do the whale watching in Kaikoura, and was like, well, I want to get a little bit closer. Oh, this one doesn't have quite the best zoom, so I'll jump across to that device and to get the result. So if they can deliver a good optical zoom, I would definitely love to see that in a smartphone.
Sure, certainly if it's compact enough that it's convenient enough to use, for sure. It might appeal to enough people to make it a viable thing, and I think it's at a certain point you just need physics to go any further with. And so you've seen built-in smartphone cameras, lenses just get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger to the point where, I think my iPhone's got these enormous things kind of chunking on the back of it. And this is kind of just an extension of that idea of that you need physics to take better photos, and if it's convenient and clips on easily enough or whatever, then maybe it could work. So
now, a couple of cybersecurity things to chat about. One of the things I used while I was away was I wanted our cats not to starve. So I ordered a pet feeder,
right?
And automated thing. You could basically, fire up the app and you go and have a look at the footage. You could, check that your cats are coming by, and it would alert you to, to motion and so on. You could set how often they were fed and how much they were fed. And so, it worked pretty well. This one,
cats stayed alive.
Yeah, the cats seem to survive and get fed and so on. Sky Me was the brand, and for whatever reason, after I got back, I started just doing a little bit of looking into the cybersecurity around these gadgets. And I saw that there were actually a number of issues depending on how you set your network up. And I think from where I was that I was probably reasonably okay in this case, but it's a little bit of a reminder of the importance of when we're investing in technology to actually take into consideration where these different vendors are at from a cybersecurity perspective. And it was an area where there are not a lot of products available. And in my case, I wanted something that could, ideally be, have a few weeks worth of food in it. And so I only came across this sort of one that had, I think it was able to store 12 liters. And I thought, that's really good. But on the flip side, you might have some other, associated concerns. So worth thinking about. And then the other thing that you and I would discuss before we started the show is some of this research that's been done recently into actually cybersecurity on cars and issues across big brands like Ferrari, BMW, Rolls-Royce, Porsche, and then the more run-of-the-mill ones as well. It seems as though there's a lot of issues.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're kind of related in a way. I mean, cars are online services in some form or another have vulnerabilities, and companies that make these products aren't always don't always have culturally don't have a culture of security and software and security thinking within their teams necessarily, or that maybe they do at a local level team, but it's the higher decision makers in the business don't put enough value in that or don't fund that well enough. We see that time and time again. And so there are a bunch of really common errors that we're seeing just playing out over and over again. Things like endpoints not even using secure transport protocols, not using HTTPS or whatever. We're seeing open access APIs that have sensitive customer data just exposed on the internet.
Really easy stuff to fix in a lot of cases, simple, right?
But they're surprisingly common and require just a level of diligence and education around, and some tooling in some cases just to actually prevent them. I mean, some of the big companies occasionally leave an S3 bucket open or something like that, just totally public, and then discover it 6 months later and issue an apology to the world.
Anyone's had access to
issue an apology to the world and say sorry about that. We'll do a retro and try to fix it later. So. It does take diligence, and I think it's not an excuse, but I think these companies aren't software companies first and foremost. They might not realize that they are becoming software companies. Increasingly car companies are becoming software companies. Yep. Tesla is born and bred as a software company, but many of the traditional automotive makers are not. Come from a very different background. Even Internet of Things, device companies are not necessarily. They might not see themselves as software companies, and so IoT space has been a bit of a trash fire in terms of security risks and leaks and things like that. So worth doing a little bit of your own due diligence, especially if you're buying a pet feed or something like that. Look for breach notifications. Just do some Googling. They may disclose, a breach notification, but often it's not. So it's a little bit hidden, a little bit buried. They don't like to make a big song and dance out of it, but they need to talk about it. So, we're seeing some, even interestingly, some breach notification pages have no index settings on them for Google and things like that, so they don't actually appear in search results.
Interesting.
Companies, they sort of have an obligation to disclose, but they don't want it sort of living forever in search results. Interesting behavior, not necessarily the right thing to do, but it can be hard to find some of that information. So, but absolutely, whenever you're buying any piece of software, which an IoT device is, it's worth doing a little bit of due diligence. What is that? What are the security settings? So do they even have a security page? Do they even talk about it? Have they had breaches? Where do you go to alert or notify of a breach? Do they even have a way to contact them, or are they just sort of a stone wall to the rest of the world? So all those things actually factor in pretty well, and that applies equally to the software world. With your provisioning business applications or whatever. You want to know about that.
Definitely in the in the business world, you need to have robust processes to go through around your
due diligence, right?
Your
it's no different
selection.
It shouldn't be any different for consumer stuff, really. Yeah.
Now, let's hear about Onwardly.
Sure.
Share some of the story of where you're
Story
at
of this crazy world.
and what have you been working on? Because I think there will be an interest amongst listeners,
Sure.
in what you're doing and what you're offering, and probably be relevant, for some of them for sure.
Yeah, happy to share. So I mentioned previously I spent about 6 or 7 years at Pushpay, which is a New Zealand sort of Kiwi unicorn that came up through sort of the 2010s. And I was lucky enough to kind of be on the ground floor of that, in the right place at the right time, and knew one of the founders quite well, and came in and really helped build out the first version of Pushpay, and really journeyed through the growth of that with the team, and was surrounded by some really, really amazing people. Got to really learn a lot from that experience, particularly around engineering, but design, but also crosses over pretty heavily into security as well, because being fintech and payments, obviously security has to be set as a pretty high standard from the very beginning.
Definitely.
So we were dealing with all sorts of lovely things like PCI and all that sort of stuff, really from the beginning. And really throughout that process, throughout the years at Pushpay, developed a keen interest, obviously, in design, but also in startups and engineering and security, and sort of those things combined really to kind of go into my next role, which was at a local company here called Whip Around. So I spent about a year with those folks and found myself really in charge of an engineering group of folks and product group and designers and things like that, running R&D. And what I found very quickly, learned and observed in other companies similar to us, was that usually the most senior technical person in a company is sort of wears the security hat. It sort of gets handed to them, right? You're in charge. Figure it out. And sometimes people aren't even asked to do it. That's kind of an implicit expectation. And so as a busy sort of CTO, I had lots and lots of things to do and zero time to do it all in. And so I was looking for answers, looking for things that could leverage my time to get the results that we needed to implement, particularly security practices and policies within the business. And I had a look around, and really wasn't a lot there in terms of kind of a software play. There was a fantastic level of help you could get from the consulting folks, and they're really good, but they're quite expensive and out of reach for quite a lot of companies. Perhaps even to do kind of the basics, to start with. And so started thinking about this gap and why didn't this exist, and put my product hat on, my designer hat on, and said, well, why isn't there? Where is the zero for security? What they did for accounting. Why doesn't that exist for the security world? And so I did a bunch of research and talked with about 20 companies around the country, mostly kind of startups in the SaaS space. And I was like, okay, what are you doing? How's it working out for you?
Yep.
And it turns out, everyone kind of had a similar set of problems. But I kind of would group into probably about 3 to 4 different problems that they were trying to address in their world. And so around about the same time, we inherited, a pandemic hit the world, and very quickly we found ourselves locked down with the rest of the country and the rest of the world to some extent at home. And it was at that point I had been researching this and talking to a few people and teaming up with some smart people, and said, okay, well, let's go for this and let's do it. A bunch of people were trying to figure out their own businesses at the time and pivot and change plans. And it seemed like a good time to start a business, in lockdown, for better or for worse. So I, at that point, really went all in on Onwardly. That was born, where I started designing and programming, the application into being throughout that kind of second half of 2020, and then teamed up with about 6 or 7 companies to really become the pilot customers for what would become the platform as it is now. So we officially launched at the beginning of 2021. So it's been about 2 years now, almost exactly.
Congratulations!
Thanks. Yeah, and it's been a crazy ride, and a startup is discovered is not for the faint of heart. It's one thing to be part of something. It's another thing to kind of run your own one. Yeah. So it's a pretty full-on experience, but something that I really wanted to do. And I really wanted to be able to help people ultimately make sense and understand security and have it way more accessible, and for it to become kind of like what I talk about is becoming a first-class citizen of the business in terms of that work.
Yeah.
A lot of that work sort of gets stuffed into various general purpose tooling and forgotten about half the time, or just sort of left as, priority number 17 on a long list of things to do.
Yeah.
And I want to see that elevated to becoming, really a first-class citizen of the business, just like any other work.
Yeah.
And people being able to do it properly, do it on a tool that makes it really easy and can leverage people's time, and really they can learn the principles of it, and really just instill trust and confidence in their own customers, but also in their stakeholders as well. So it's an interesting challenge. It's you're trying to do it for ultimately to preserve and protect the business and reduce risk, but you're also trying to do it to engender trust into people, both inside and outside the business. So it's very much a communication exercise as much as anything.
Yeah, right.
So there are some particular challenges there.
In terms of sort of what you found as your sweet spot with with initial customers, how has that sort of landed? Is it sort of big or small? Is it there are particular areas where you've seen a real stronger uptake, where people get it and realize, hey, we need this stuff, and this is a really good approach to take.
Indeed. So we started actually in the SaaS kind of startup space at the very beginning, partly because I kind of knew a bunch of companies in that space and could identify with a very common set of problems there. Startups are reasonably early adopters of things. They can get up and running. There's relatively quick decision making most of the time, compared to traditional businesses, perhaps.
Yeah.
And they have they have a growth mandate, so they're growing quite fast. So they have they have the desire and mandate to spend money to do those things.
Yeah.
So all those combination things work quite well. But actually, you've discovered, it's really applicable to many different types of businesses, and we actually have some non-profit organizations on our platform as well, which are benefiting a lot from it. And more recently, we've had a lot of interest from kind of more consultative type people, so managed service provider type folks. Security consultants are a really important partner for us, and other folks who are already looking after customers in a certain capacity, but need a platform to really turbocharge all the work that they're doing.
Brilliant.
So that's a really big focus for us at the moment, is how do we partner with those folks who we can then help their own customer base, and so far the results seem really promising in that area. So it's going to be a big focus for us going forward as well.
That's good. So an exciting 2023 ahead.
Yeah, it's going to be a big year for us. It's an interesting economic conditions. I think everyone's feeling that, and this year will be probably no different to last year. So everyone's sort of navigating through that storm in a way. But we've got a lot of really cool plans in the pipeline. We're really excited. The team's pumped, ready to go, and I'm excited. So,
that's really good.
Back into it.
Well, we look forward to following progress and catching up along the way with how that goes. For folks that are interested in getting in touch, are you accessible on LinkedIn, or
find me on LinkedIn.
What are the different ways?
LinkedIn's probably the best place. I'm on Twitter, but find me on LinkedIn, Phil Howie, and Onwardly is the business name. Easy to find. Just connect with me, send me a message. Otherwise, you can just Google us, Onwardly, just one word. You'll find us pretty quick. Onwardly.io. And we'll love to connect, love to chat. if you're a founder or working in a business, please reach out. Love to chat, just hear your story, and it's always good to meet folks in the local scene. So
Great.
be great.
Excellent. Well, thanks very much for joining us. It's been great to
Thank you for
great to
having me.
catch up. Also, a big thank you to our show partners, Vodafone, 2 Degrees, Spark, HP, and Gorilla Technology. Appreciate their ongoing support of the New Zealand Tech Podcast. And yeah, we'll be back again next week. Now, for those that have been watching the video, do make sure you go and find NZ Tech Podcast in your in a podcast app on your phone, so that you've got those episodes that you might miss from a video perspective. So if you're new to audio podcasts, then the likes of Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, easy way to go. If you're listening to the audio but you haven't caught the video, most times on a Tuesday afternoon we will be going live, and whatever platform that you consume video on, we're on. I guess LinkedIn's sort of the main platform, so you can certainly follow myself and the NZ Tech Podcast there if you want to catch the videos. But we are on Twitter and Facebook and YouTube as well. So yeah, that's us. Thank you, Joe Allen. Thank you for great production and keeping us on the air and going well. Really great to have you on the team. And that's us for this time. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Cheers.
everyone. Cheers.
The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.